Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Toilets to Titles. I'm your host, Justin Stevens. I'm excited about this new little series that I'm beginning for this offseason. For those of you that remember from last offseason, I did a team-by-team offseason breakdown where it was pretty much just me in front of a camera, and it was boring as hell, and it was just a whole lot of stats and numbers. And unfortunately, that's not the type of show that we like to put on. So I decided this time what I would do this year is I would bring on some guests that are fans of that particular show. I feel like it'll be a little bit more entertaining. You'll get more direct knowledge from the guys that follow the teams directly. So today I have on a couple of awesome guests that were willing to come on and spend a little time with us. We'll start off by introducing Willie Lutz down here at the bottom of your screen. Willie is with @LastWord on NFL, and he's also the host of @SameOldStripes. You can find him lastwordonsports.com. Willie, how's it going?
Doing good. Ready for a schedule release tonight. I'm excited to see some of the Bengals primetime games in particular. Hopefully there's one or two against maybe the Steelers or the Browns, but hanging in there. It's a pretty day in Central Ohio where I'm located right now, and I'm excited to talk a little Cincinnati Bengals football with you guys.
Right on. Before we get into the meat and taters of it all, I'm assuming that the Same Old Stripes is an all Bengals podcast.
You guessed correctly, my friend.
Is there anything else you want to say about it or try to get out about it before we get rolling? Because I will most likely forget to have you plug it at the end of the show.
Oh, you're in good shape. We have a new show coming out tomorrow morning, so if you guys get a chance to check it out, do all the stuff you need to do. We're on all the platforms. We have a link tree in the bio to the page, so click that and find your platform and give us a list when you get a chance.
Right on. Sounds good, Willie. The other guest that we have up next to me, up above Willie's head, is Mike Watts of the Cincinnati Bengals. Mike Watts is the preseason play-by-play TV announcer. You can find him at Mike Watts on Air on Twitter and also MikeWattsOnAir.com. Mike, how's it going today?
It's good, Justin. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat about the Bengals and what I thought was a pretty good offseason.
Honestly, whenever I sent you the invite, I thought, man, a guy that talks about the Bengals for a living is probably a little less likely to want to come on and talk about it for free. But I'm glad that you took the time out for us.
Oh, I'm not getting paid? Oh, Willie, let's go, man. We're done.
All right, see you later.
All right, that was a great show, guys. Catch us for the Falcons show. In about an hour. Awesome. Also, obviously, you guys can catch me at JustinFF_, and you know about our handle at Toilets to Titles that I can't find right now, at Toilets to Titles. And then, of course, you can check out all of our Twitter handles for the entire team. All 7 of us will be scrolling down at the bottom at some point. I'll pop it up here while we're talking. But in the meantime, I only have you guys for about maybe another 20, 25 minutes, so I want to get right into it. And I want to jump right into the draft, this season's draft. I felt like, for me personally, not knowing the team, I kind of felt like it was very important for the Bengals to go offensive line early and often. I kind of felt like that was a weakness of theirs. Not that they surprised me by getting, Joe Burrow's teammate from college to come on board in the first round. I think that's going to be a dynamic duo. But what did you guys think about that? And do you think that they've addressed that offensive line enough, or am I overreacting and there really wasn't a huge need there?
Well, I guess I'll take this one first and say that I think in Cincinnati, in the weeks leading up to the draft, the fan base, for the most part, got really, really comfortable with the Ja'Marr Chase fit. And I think it came kind of twofold. First of all, they addressed some of the spots on the offensive line in the offseason, or in free agency, I should say. The addition of Riley Reef at right tackle in particular is going to be a really huge improvement over Bobby Hart. I think every Bengals fan that has ever had a Twitter account will be happy to tell that to you. Re-signing Quentin Spain after he joined week 6 and was kind of a spot starter throughout the year, having him plug in at left guard. I mean, that gives you 4 solid guys. And then heading into the draft, that hole at right guard was the obvious glaring hole. Now, Bengals fans could debate all they wanted about who should be the man to fill that hole. Should it be Penei Sewell, or should it be whoever comes in the second round? Or should it be Rashawn Slater? But the way the Bengals chose to go, they chose to fix the deep ball, one of the biggest problems they had last year, pick Joe Burrow's college teammate in best receiver in the draft by most accounts, depending on how you rank Kyle Pitts in that kind of class. But I think, you're on point with a little bit of worry about the offensive line. And, Jackson Carman, the tackle out of Clemson's far from a sure thing, but he's got key endorsements from guys like Willie Anderson, who's a franchise great and a potential Hall of Famer, and Frank Pollock, who was responsible for the Andrew Whitworth project that we've all seen pay off in the long run and see him become one of the league's greats. So I think Bengals fans are relatively comfortable with the offensive line, maybe a little bit of stomach churn, but Mike, what do you think about things?
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think the offensive line will improve simply through coaching next year. Bringing in Coach Pollock is obviously a plus. To your point, you do end up bringing back Quentin Spain. You also have potentially a full year of Xavier Suafilo, who was injured much of last year. So you've got a little more depth at the guard position. You still have Billy Price. Maybe you can unearth maybe the best of him. He can play both guards and the center. So you've got a lot of options there now that you've added Jackson Carman. With Riley Reif, you've got a guy who solidifies the right side. Jonah Williams wasn't exceptional, but he certainly wasn't poor. And what really was his rookie season when you consider that he missed his true first year due to a shoulder injury. So in total, you'd argue that they did address the offensive line in a way that they felt comfortable enough. Joe Burrow, obviously, is good enough as an improviser, but you need to keep him upright and healthy. And realistically, you've improved at least 2 spots of the offensive line. You could argue if the coaching goes the way you think, you've improved all 5 positions. Beyond that, CJ Uzomah comes back, so you've got a decent tight end. This is a team that primarily goes 3 wide, 1 tight end, 1 running back. You feel like the tight end position is okay. If Kyle Pitts was there, who knows how this would have gone down, but you didn't necessarily need Penei Sewell. You did need someone beyond Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. A lot of talk about A.J. Green's 100 targets last year, only 50-some catches out of that. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, to the point that was already made, is ultimately Joe Burrow struggled to throw the deep ball, which is something he was truly prolific at LSU. Some of that, I think, does come back to chemistry, having a weird COVID-shortened offseason, no preseason, only getting 8 games in. You could say that's part of it, but also you need the weapon that most effectively does that. Jamar Chase is able to do that. That is conceivably the best receiver in the draft, and you could argue now that between Joe Mixon, if he's able to carry the ball 300 times, and the 3 receivers that you're going to start in that primary formation, you have one of the best sets of weapons in the AFC North, maybe in the AFC in general. That's a really enviable position to put yourself in. And beyond that, it's very difficult to lure a big-name wide receiver, big money, after one contract is done. I think to be able to go get a guy who can be a cornerstone in the wide receiver room for the next 5 years at least, and maybe long beyond that, like Chad Johnson was and like A.J. Green was, can give you a corner piece of your offense for years to come.
Fair enough. And some of the best offenses out there in recent NFL history have 3 dynamic wide receivers. So you have it now. You absolutely have it. So I'm pretty excited about it. I listen to a lot of fantasy football podcasts from a lot of these fantasy football hacks like myself that act like we know what we're talking about. And of all of us, the majority of us had Jamar Chase down as possibly one of the best wide receivers coming out of college in recent years, and that's including the amazing class that we had last year. So I'm pretty excited to see how that's going to translate on the field. But again, we are a fantasy football centric show. This particular show did not have to steer that way. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But you mentioned CJ Uzomah coming back. In your mind, Mike, who do you think is the lead tight end in that room now that he's back?
Yeah, it's theoretically, and Willie, correct me if I'm wrong, theoretically you'd still say it's Uzomah as a pass catcher. Certainly when you draft a guy like Drew Sample where they did, the expectation is that he would progress into that role. And we've seen a lot of guys who are great blocking tight ends. And gosh, if Pittsburgh hasn't had at least 3 of them over the last decade that have just torn AFC North hearts out. Guys that are maybe a little stodgier. It's not Travis Kelce. It's not Jimmy Graham. but or Gronk, it's just they're physical. They're able to make that 10-yard catch, the Jason Witten type. That's sort of the hope, I think, for Drew Sample at this stage as a pass catcher. And when you consider the options they have at receiver, you're not really expecting Drew Sample to make runs down the seam. Ultimately, this is still a one tight end offense. And I think Uzomah, if he's healthy and 100%, would be the guy who's going to lead the way in that tight end room. But I think there is room for others, including Thad Moss, to get some time now that he's come in as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head there for basically everything you said. You're going to see Drew Sample definitely, sent out there more as kind of a blocking set kind of tight end. Zach Taylor infamously likes to stick in 11 personnel, so you won't see a whole lot of 2 tight end sets. You won't see a whole lot of Drew Sample targets this year if I had to assume. But CJ Uzomah, Joe Burrow loves tight ends, and I will say I've heard things inside of Paul Brown Stadium that the whole organization can not say enough good stuff about Uzomah. He's one of the guys they've been trying to put out in front of the fans as much as possible. If you follow any of the stuff the Bengals do on social media, he's always one of the guys featured in the videos. So, I would expect a healthy dose of him in 2021. And if you're the kind of person that watched Joe Burrow's tape at LSU and saw him hit Thad Moss for all those, great touchdowns and put the ball in crazy spots for him in the end zone, he's maybe a good pickup. I will say I think there's a potential that Thad Moss comes in and vultures some of those, roles in the red zone in particular. I was watching a couple old Joe Burrow games after that signing, and, the ability for Thad Moss to play an impact inside the 20 is just off the charts. And if they can, rekindle that connection like they're already thinking with Jamar Chase, I would not be surprised at all to see CJ be used inside the 20s, or I should say between the 20s, and then see Thad Moss get rolled out a little bit more when they're in the red zone. Something to look forward to, I guess. But, there's a little hope for Thad Moss to really make an impact on this roster.
Yeah, and I think the potential is there for the Bengals to roll out and the defense against them not be able to cover all of these weapons every single play, So, but you mentioned Paul Brown Stadium. I gotta throw it out there that I did actually visit there a couple of years ago. My son unfortunately is a big Lions fan. I don't really know how that happened. You try to do your best, you try to raise them right, but ultimately they make their own decisions, right? But he's a big Lions fan, so I took him to Cincinnati to see the Bengals play because I'm not too far from you guys. I'm a Colts fan, and I live about halfway between Indianapolis and Cincinnati. So we drove out there to watch him play, and that stadium is actually really, really nice. It's the fans were amazing. Everybody was super nice, and it was a lot of fun. I had to throw out the love for Paul Brown Stadium whenever you mentioned that. But real quick, just to finish up with this draft, I also noticed, like you guys did say, they have made the improvements to the offensive line. They made a total of looks like 5 picks in the second, third, and fourth round, and all 5 of them were on the line, whether it be offensive or defensive line. So it kind of, I was impressed with how focused they were on that defensive line, even picking up another late defensive end later on, and then with their free agent ads with Trey Hendrickson. They really did try to work. So they really did try to work that defensive line. Is there really hope that the defense could be that much better next season? Because it kind of felt like there was potential and a lot of high hopes going into last season for that defense.
Yeah, I think there's a much better potential for this defense to have a nice 2021 season. And I would say the big red flag on things are the 2 free agent departures. Granted, they filled them with Trey Hendrickson and Chidobe Awuzie, but William Jackson III, the corner, departed for the Washington football team. And then you have probably the biggest loss of the offseason is going to be Carl Lawson, who was really coming on at the end of last year. And I think trailed just TJ Watt in terms of pressures. And, he wasn't hitting the quarterback to the ground, but he was right there quite often. So what you're really going to have to determine is if this defense is going to turn a corner, it's really going to be, does one of these, draft pick defensive ends pop? Because you're going to kind of replace some of those Carl Lawson, pressures with Trey Hendrickson pressures, and that could be a 1-for-1 wash in a lot of ways, even if it's just 90% of Lawson's production. But if Joseph Osai or Cam Sample in particular, that's a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick and a 4th-round pick back-to-back, you need one of those guys to pop, no question, and you need them to pop fast. They're both kind of similar in the fact that they're high motor dudes, not the stockiest, but they're kind of, narrow and find ways to get to the quarterback. You get one of those guys to have production pretty quickly. I mean, that's a scary defense. Granted, they were one of the worst teams at getting to the quarterback last year. I think they finished second to last in total sacks, if not dead last. So, I mean, you're going to need to see some improvement on that defensive line. Health will help. Having DJ Reader for a full season will help. Having Trey Waynes now in his first full season in Cincinnati after missing his first contracted season will help. But really, it's going to come down to, I think, health and then one of those rookies popping.
Yeah, inclined to agree with that. And there's some maybe low risk, high reward guys that have come in this most recent free agency class. Eli Apple was a really early pick, went to New Orleans, had a few pretty decent seasons and a few that maybe didn't fit the bill. So it kind of comes down to expectations versus reality. You mentioned Awuzie coming in. You still have the best safety potentially in all of football in Jesse Bates. And Von Bell, who's good stopping the run. You've got another year older for that really young core of linebackers, which would give you a little bit of excitement. Logan Wilson at moments had really, top tier moments on that defense in terms of forcing turnovers, being solid, slowing up the run. And then defensive line. Ultimately, Carlos Dunlap went and did well in Seattle, but it was a drag early in the season when Carlos Dunlap was on the field. It's just honesty. Carl Lawson, as good as he was, as much of an athletic animal as he is, I mean, he's just, you can see him, he's got these giant arms and he can just rip right through guys. He took good lines. He just didn't get the guy down very much. And the problem with creating all those pressures and not ultimately creating sacks is quarterbacks in this league are getting better at evading those sacks with consistency, and that's where they hurt you most. What you can say about Hendrickson is he doesn't necessarily have all the physical talent of Carl Lawson, but he does get the guy to the ground. And so there's a lot of value there. Larry Ogunjobi, I think, will help in the middle. I mean, the middle of the defensive line last year, once DJ Reader got hurt, suddenly became a lot of guys that were pulled off the street in the middle of a COVID year, where theoretically it was already a little bit thin to begin with. So you added Tyler Shelvin, who can be another plug in the middle of the field in that fourth round. And to your point, I mean, ultimately Cam Sample, I think, is the guy people probably have their eyes on, in part because of how well he did in the Senior Bowl. But the difference between Tulane and playing in the NFL is obviously going to be quite different. It'll be interesting to see how he sort of maneuvers in. I spoke with someone around the organization within the last couple of weeks who said, look, we got our top tier wide receiver, we got a guard, and then we spent all these picks on linemen. That's going to be the foundation. If we get those right, and then you got a really solid kicker, probably best in the draft, a running back that they have a bit of conviction in out of Michigan. So those 5 picks in the middle where you address the line, Dunlap, Atkins, you've been able to get guys in that neck of the woods in the draft previously that became franchise icons. And if you can grab 1 or 2 of those in this draft, that could really change the trajectory during this Joe Burrow rookie contract.
Right on. Yeah, that's great stuff. So speaking of the kicker, this Evan Mcpherson guy, is he the guy on the video on Twitter that we've seen where he kicked the ball that spun the cap off of the bottle?
That's your man right there.
That's unbelievable. Like I don't know if that's real or not. I don't know if that was staged or whatever, or how many takes it took. But I tell you what, that was impressive. That was fun. If you guys haven't checked that out on Twitter, you need to check that out. Evan Mcpherson. And there's going to be some awesome team names and fantasy football team names involved with Fearsome in there somewhere. But no, that's pretty incredible. So in my mind, it sounds like we're pretty optimistic. We're pretty excited about the offense. We're pretty excited about the defense. It's a young team that could only potentially get better. I'm excited about some coaching moves. So altogether, you guys sound pretty optimistic. I think the one key element that is huge here is that injury to Joe Burrow, which from all accounts, it seems like he's on pace, he's on track, and everything's looking good. But What's the word on the street, around the Cincinnati area? Is there something going on that maybe we should be worried about?
I would say in terms of Joe Burrow, there's no worry. I actually got a chance to catch a couple spots of Joe Burrow throwing on the field at Paul Brown Stadium a couple weeks ago. A little behind the scenes action there, but he looks great, and he's doing workout in California with Jordan Palmer, who's his quarterback's coach and has been since the draft process. But I think the area for concern, I mean, we talked about it not being as much of a concern earlier, but protecting Burrow, especially in the first couple of weeks of the season, is going to be imperative to their 2021 success. I mean, if we're looking at this team and all of a sudden it's the same thing as 2020, where it's just dudes running free shot at Joe Burrow, like in particular week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles, where he took shot after shot after shot. I mean, something's going to have to change. And I also think there's a little bit of trepidation with Zach Taylor as a head coach. I tend to like him, but you get 6 wins or 5 wins or so in this number of years. It's about time to start winning some football games. And I think they do have a winnable opener week 1, and that'll be a really interesting test in particular. Especially, and I'll throw this nugget in there because I think the Bengals would be interested in, if Zach Taylor doesn't do too well this season, bring Mike Zimmer, back to the jungle for the 2022 opener. I think Mike Zimmer is someone the organization has a lot of interest in, and he's something to keep your eye on. So Zach Taylor definitely probably the biggest concern in terms of the organization right now, aside from the offensive line.
Yeah, and I think as much as Joe Burrow's health comes into question, you'd also have to say Joe Mixon's health comes into question, right? That foot injury that just sort of stretched, and maybe if the record was different, he'd be playing towards the end of that, but obviously wasn't at the tail end of last year. Can you get 300 quality touches out of him, be it in the pass game or otherwise? You lost your best pass blocking running back in Giovanni Bernard. You released him. So, that can be a big difference as well in how you protect Joe Burrow. There's talk about Joe Mixon being a 3-down guy. That's going to mean in a 11 personnel, more often than not, he's going to have to do some blocking, and he'll have to do it well. The other thing is from a fantasy perspective, I would watch the preseason to an extent, shameless plug, to sort of see how Jamar Chase looks and how the offense is clicking. But you aren't really going to know how Joe Burrow is confident as he comes off. Anyone who comes off an injury like that, and I've spoken to so many pro athletes, how do you step into it? Do you feel comfortable throwing the long ball? How comfortable are you running outside the pocket? Those things take a little time, and it doesn't matter how confident you are. It can be a bit of a scary first step back in. We even heard Alex Smith talk about it coming off clearly a much more severe injury. But, coming back, there's a little bit on your shoulder with that. So I'm intrigued to see the first few weeks how Joe Burrow plays just as he gets back into the flow of it. Because in reality, it's still only going to be, I believe, his 10th start as an NFL quarterback when he steps back in. So he was so good last year that we sort of lost track that he's still just a kid to an extent. But the optimism's there because Joe Burrow's there. But you also, you need to protect him, and you need to make sure that you've got a good outlet for him in the backfield that helps to take a little bit of pressure off of him as well.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Willie, you mentioned the week 1 opener. So since they just announced it recently, who do they have in week 1?
It's going to be Minnesota Vikings at Paul Brown Stadium, play Cincinnati Bengals in week 1.
Yeah, and the Bengals actually get the extra home game this season, right?
Yes, sir. They're playing the 49ers in that one.
All right, right on. Yeah, so and the 49ers are another young team that are kind of up in the air right now, and who knows what they're going to be looking like at quarterback by the time they play you guys. But yeah, so I think I just have one more question for you guys on our way out the door here, and then when we sign off, if you would just stick around for a few moments. But so with all the optimism, have you guys had time to sit down and consider what you would consider to be a successful season or an unsuccessful season this up and coming season, considering how young they are?
That's a great question.
That's why I'm letting you go first.
Yeah, I was going to see if I could get you to play chicken and do it, but I'll take my swing. Honestly, anything close to 500 is going to be a win for this team. I mean, this is a team that's picked top 5 in the last 2 drafts, period. When you're picking top 5 in back-to-back drafts, your organization's doing something wrong. And if they're back there, even in the top 10, that's a really poor reflection on, this organization spent a record number of free agency for them over the last 2 years. And it's also going to be a huge reflection on their coaching hire that they made, but it's going to be 3 years ago at the end of this season. So they're going to have to win some games and be in the middle of the pack. Obviously, you want to keep Joe healthy first and foremost, but it's going to be winning football games and getting somewhere close to 500, even if it's winning the ugly ones where you're really gutting one out against the Jaguars or something. It's going to have to change because Zach Taylor, I think Warren Sharp had a stat, but he's been leading in 22 of 26 first halves in his career. And here we are talking about a guy who's won 6 games in 2 years. So it's just the ship's got to change, and they got to be close to 500 to have a successful season.
Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with the overall mark. I think the question is ultimately Zach Taylor's job, as much as it is to win games this year, is to continue to groom Joe Burrow. You brought him in because he's an impressive play caller. We've seen his 4th down numbers are great. I mean, he's got a decent feel for calling a game, but now you've got the weapons and you're getting Joe Burrow off injury. So early on, it might be a little bit careful with how you go about things, but gradually you need to pick up full tilt really quickly. I mean, you've put together a group of weapons that you hope can give you 30 points a game and maybe compete with, the Kansas Cities of the world who can put that up in their sleep. So that's a big part of it. If their defense improves to an extent, you look at the last 2 years and you go, something like 30 or 40 guys have ended up on IR. So just staying healthy long enough to compete for a playoff position or compete to be 500 would be a big plus. But it's been a lot of freaky injuries over the last couple of years. Some you can point to specific reasons in terms of roster build, and others, frankly, you can't. And so, if you can get near 500, that's a plus. If you look at the history of teams that have gone top 5 back-to-back, get the quarterback who ends up being an all-pro, usually year 2, year 3, year 4 are your window to sort of jump into contention. So they've spent the money. They've now got, I think, a top-tier offensive arsenal. They've improved their offensive line, and defensively they're 1 year older, which for a team that young is a positive. So, around 500 would be a great start.
Outstanding. Yeah. So, I agree with that. And looking at the teams that they have on the docket for this season, there are 8 or 9 teams that I think are very winnable games, assuming they win half of their division games,
Well, and isn't that the question, Justin?
Yes.
The Browns have never been better. The Steelers might be, stepping down with Ben, but the Ravens are as good as any team in the AFC. Like, yikes, man. It's a tough time to come into the division.
That's true. That's very true. All right. So I think it's all I have time for today, but I feel like any Bengals fans out there that want to get a little bit of extra info that happen to stumble upon this show are going to get that extra info. You guys brought the heat today. I really appreciate you coming on. Again, real quick, I just want to drop up your guys' information here so that people can check you out. There's Willie Lutz at Last Word on NFL, host of at Same Old Stripes. Find him at lastwordonsports.com, and Mike Watts, the TV play-by-play preseason Bengals announcer, at Mike Watts on air on Twitter and MikeWattsOnAir.com. Again, fellas, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. You guys have a good luck this season. Good luck to the Bengals, and I hope you guys have a great season.
Thanks. Who day?